Good evening, friends. We have a bit of a unique guest today who will remain anonymous. As you might notice, under where you see his chin, there's an image of a man reading a book. That is to block his actual name, because he approached me and told me that he is a former U.S. Army officer who now lives in Russia. So you can imagine why he might want to be at least semi-anonymous. Anyways, dear guest, thank you for being on the program. I really appreciate it. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Well, that's sometimes an interesting start to the interview. Anyways, could you tell us a bit then about your background to the extent that you want to expose it to us, and about what it was like being, I would presume, of Russian origin, judging by your first and last name, an American Army officer?
I can speak. I've been on the news and the media in Russia so much that I'm sure the CIA knows me better than I know myself by this point. I can ask them what I said a week ago for transcript.
Well, if they really want to know, they'll find out. But
yeah, it's no big deal. No, I moved to the U.S. in '79, so I was 8 years old.
Okay.
Back then. So. I grew up in the U.S., went through university, and then 95 became an officer. I enlisted in 93 in the Guard, and then became an officer on active duty. It was interesting. Did 11 years of service.
Mm-hmm.
So,
one thing is, if you came in 1979 as a child, how did your parents get out of the Soviet Union?
My father was a dissident, and he had an opportunity opened up, and he took the family out. He was very liberal when he left. And by the time he got his citizenship 5 years later, as a political refugee, he got a citizenship 5 years later. He was already a registered Republican. So liberalism. It's one thing, liberalism, when you have it in theory. Yeah. It's a whole different thing when you see it in real life.
Could you maybe elaborate on that further? I know you can't just jump into the mind of your father and express someone else's views, but that's kind of interesting. They have a Soviet dissident who's a liberal. They come to America, and then after 5 years are voting hardcore Republican. Like, what things happened to him that made this change, or did he never mention it to you?
Well, my father used to say, "Очень много правды в правде."
So there's a lot of truth in truth?
Yeah, well, Pravda is a Soviet newspaper.
In that sense.
Yes. They printed a lot about the West that was truthful, that nobody just wanted to believe it.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, there used to be an NGO that operated in Russia. They've quit since then, and they were operating under the theory that the reason that Russians don't want to become liberal Democrats like the West is because they just don't understand the West. So their mission was to translate all Western articles and news blogs and so on into Russian. What they found out is the more they translated and the more the insane liberalism in the West was on print for Russians to see, the further Russians went in the opposite direction. So they were actually working against it.
Well, yeah. In fact, like what you just mentioned about the Pravda of Pravdia, there was also another expression that I've heard where it was like the Communist Party, they lied to us about the Soviet Union, but told us the God's honest truth about America. That's one I've heard from Russian people too about that. So that's kind of interesting that they really kind of because to be honest, well, would you say then maybe? I think the real thing that Russians actually honestly like about America, and you probably, I would have to assume Russian people who've moved to America or were expats there. To be honest, I don't think they actually like America. They just like the stuff. Would you agree with that?
No. Okay. It's a little more nuanced than that. A lot of Russians, and they're not exclusive in this, they have a disease, a psychological disease, that's called the American Dream.
Oh.
And that's sponsored by Hollywood and other things like that. So they watch American movies, they watch American shows, and I think people actually live the way they see, on Sex and the City or some of these Hollywood from the '90s, the little starlets and all their lives. They think that that New York apartments, like in Frineds, are 2,000 square meters square feet. I'm sorry, 200 square meters.
Friend, when you brought up that reference, you were much more American than Russian, because everyone in America knows that, and we watch those shows, but we know it's insane because that apartment would be like $6,000-7,000 or more to rent per month. It's the size of a soccer field.
$6,000-7,000 to rent per month back in the '90s.
Yeah.
The problem is most Russian people, well, I won't say most anymore. People have sobered up quite a bit, especially in the last 2 years. But many Russians have no idea how much anything costs over there. And they see this, people really live like that. No, they don't. They don't live anything. When you start to try to explain to people that, the average American lives paycheck to paycheck, they can't understand that.
Mm-hmm. They really can't believe it. In fact, I would say that it's almost like people have been so propagandized here that when they see some of these images of like people like zombies stumbling around in California on drugs, it's almost like it doesn't get into their heads because they've been so densely programmed in advance. I don't know if I'm explaining myself well, but something like that.
California, more like every single city in the U.S. these days. Franklin Street in Philadelphia is like ground zero for fentanyl.
One thing you probably don't know much about me is, since I came from Cleveland, like one thing I also have trouble explaining to Russians is, because I'm from Cleveland, I saw all that, like the first wave of that hit when I was a teenager. Like, for example, one guy I knew worked after school at a pizza place, and like someone just died of a cocaine overdose, like in the toilet, like the bathroom. Now I'm speaking like a Russian, in the toilet, on the toilet, at this pizza place, and like no one noticed for a while. Like, that was just, like, normal stuff in the Cleveland universe. And you look at this and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to change. But anyways, we're talking a little bit too much about the social side of things, and I want to talk more about the military side of things, especially for people who might be disappointed they clicked on, because I think they want to hear more about some of your military experiences and some of your expertise. So let me ask you one thing, as someone then who served and got to the officer level. I've heard two versions of the war of Ukraine, that basically this counteroffensive didn't go well, either because A, the Ukrainians didn't follow NATO protocol, or B, because they did follow like NATO protocol and they did everything to NATO standards and the standards are bad. Those two can't be true at the same time. So why did this counteroffensive fail, in your opinion, as an expert?
By the way, well, just one little side note. You being from Cleveland, Ohio. East Palestine, Ohio? Yeah, I lived there for about a year.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, the American Chernobyl, ground zero.
Yeah. I just have to say that I'm very thankful to the man above that at least my parents were safe. Apparently, the toxins mostly went south. So poor West Virginia, but my parents were spared. So,
the cloud from the burn as Canada went over the Great Lakes.
Oh no!
So
then I've been lied to.
Fallout straight north.
Yeah.
So that means it's falling out over the Great Lakes. It's falling out everywhere, and the alkaline chemicals, they went straight into groundwater.
Yeah.
And it means the Ohio River and on down to the Gulf of Mexico eventually.
Well, yeah, that's a big problem, man, because the Ohio River, that's one of the, which again connects to the Mississippi, if memory serves me correct, and that is one of the largest sources of water for all of us. But we could talk about the water problems in America all day long. I want to jump back more into this whole military kind of thing about, again, with the counteroffensive. It failed because NATO has policies they didn't follow, or they did follow the NATO policies, which are terrible. People keep saying both things in the media, which is true. I have no idea.
Let's begin with this. There is no such thing as NATO tactics or something other NATO standards in this or other crap like that. That's all simplistic. Pardon the French. It's all simplistic civilian speak. The fact is, every nation learns from every other nation. Mm-hmm. That's why they serve as observers to observe how war goes. It's been done since the last 400 or 500 years, if not longer. Yeah. Probably longer. You watch how different armies function. You see how they tackle different issues, and you learn from that, and you adjust your own policies. Even Blitzkrieg is not a German invention. For example, Blitzkrieg is a Soviet invention. Mm-hmm. The Germans picked up and perfected. They did bring it to a different level, but they picked it up in the early 1930s when they trained in the Soviet Union before Hitler came to power. So again, when you say it's a NATO standard form of attack, no, it's not. It's a standard breach operation for a defensive line. Now, having said that, a standard breach operation for a defensive line, I'm going to describe it to you. You tell me what it looked like compared to what the Ukrainians did.
I'm listening. I'm all ears.
Standard breach line operation. First of all, it's probably the most difficult operation there is. You're breaching a concentrated defensive perimeter that's got a security zone or a gray zone in Russian to the north. You've got to the north of it, in front of it, you've got minefields, you've got obstacles, you've got trenches, obstacles being wire, being dragon's teeth, or hedgehogs, depending. In this case, they were just dragon teeth. There weren't any hedgehogs. Seen some wooden hedgehogs when I went down to the front lines, but I didn't see any metal hedgehogs. So that stop a small vehicle, wheel vehicle, but wouldn't stop a tank. Having said that, and then you've got firing positions and bunkers that are covering each other, with able to cover the battlefield and able to cover any gray zones in between. So you have suppressive fire. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, units going in, first of all, you're normally going to send your most elite units, and they're going to suffer between 30 to 70 to 80% casualty rates.
Oh,
this is how serious that operation is. So when you're normally, optimally, let me put it that way. I won't say normal. There is no normal in war. Optimally, you're going to have at least local air superiority. Scratch that, you're going to have enough anti-air systems on location to counter any air superiority of your enemy. You're going to need to have artillery superiority. Mm-hmm. You're going to need to have large-scale combat engineers. You're going to need to have smoke. So what happens? Normal attack is, for something like this, is first echelon, you're attacking division-wide. Division is 3 brigades. 3 brigades is 3 battalions. 3 battalions is 3 companies, plus there's a command company and so on. But combat companies will be 3 companies. And then down to usually 3 to 4 platoons, depending on how much you plus up the units going in. After that, there's going to be another division for the second wave and another division for a third wave, depending on how many lines of defense you have to cross. You're normally going to attack 2 brigades forward, 1 brigade reserve. Those brigades break down to 2 battalions forward, 1 battalion fire support. Down to 2 companies attacking at the front with 1 company in the back putting down suppressive fire. Mm-hmm. So you come down, you come up to the minefield, you drop smoke on the minefield so the enemy can't see what you're doing. You drop heavy artillery barrages up and down the enemy position so they won't lift their heads up to see the smoke so they can't see what you're doing. Yeah. You pump your engineers forward. They start to clear under, and probably clearing under fire because the enemy is going to be firing back on you with anything they've got artillery-wise. They've got everything targeted in.
Well, yeah, they know you're advancing, so even if they don't have the best visibility, they can sort of judge where to shoot,
Well, they'll have target reference points already fixed. Yeah. So if they know about where you're at, they've got every target point in that area already written down, so the coordinates on it. It's a prepared defense, and they're just going to be lobbing everything they have. Yeah, blind probably, but with drones, it makes their life a lot easier to actually correct. So you're going to have a lot of smoke, and in that smoke, you've got to start clearing lanes, tank lanes. So when you clear those tank lanes, engineers we're going to suffer a lot of casualties. I mean, that's how it is. Yeah. Whether they're using vehicles or whether they're doing it by hand, then you start pumping your units through. Usually you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4 corridors, and down those corridors, about a tank and a half wide, you're going to start pumping entire battalions. So just understand, NATO standards, 4 tanks or 4 armored fighting vehicles, IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, for mechanized infantry companies, 4 vehicles in 1 platoon, 3 platoons is 12 vehicles plus company commanders and executive officers' vehicles, so 14 vehicles, combat vehicles in a company. So you're looking at let's see, that's 14. 44 vehicles in a battalion, combat vehicles in a battalion.
You're kind of getting a lot of terminology. Overall, you said 2 divisions attack. So how many vehicles is there for this?
No, that's one division wide. One division wide with the second division in echelon, second echelon, the third division.
First division. Then, how many vehicles do they have, roughly speaking? Roughly.
It depends on the division. It depends on what kind of division it is. If it's a mechanized division, again, if you're looking, I'm not going to say all vehicles because there's a lot of other vehicles involved. Yeah. There's a lot of there's 113s that are ambulances. If you're looking at American division, there are 113s that are fire support vehicles. They're different. They've got different antenna on top. The 113's got only one antenna.
About this, just as a brief aside. Now, the Russians actually mentioned that they destroyed something like 18,000 infantry fighting vehicles. And throughout the process of this war, generally the Russians have usually been more, let's just say, careful to not over-exaggerate. Do they include something like a Lada Granta that's being used on the front line as an infantry fighting vehicle? How could they even have 18,000 of them?
Well, no, it doesn't include that, but it includes Striker BTRs, Soviet BTRs. It includes Max Pros. It includes what are those? The Cobra or Cheetah.
No, that I don't know.
Anyways, vehicles kind of like the Max Pro. I can't remember the name of it right now.
But so anyways, they're military. They're not civilian vehicles gussied up.
Well, they're military, but there's military and there's military. They're not they're mission capable, but they've been given to the Ukrainians. They're just basically rolling coffins.
Gotcha.
So anyway, so what your point is, if you're doing a classical breach, your tracked vehicles are and your infantry that's been dislodged. From the tracked vehicles, from the infantry fighting vehicles, they're going to be doing the clearing on the first lane, the breach. Yeah. Their job is they've cleared the lanes with the combat engineers. They've punched through the first line of defenses, and they stop.
Yeah,
hold that area. They open a big corridor. Then comes the next division, 2 brigades, 1 brigade in the rear as a reserve, and they go through the breach, and they go into the next line of defense. Depending on how many lines of defenses you have. Eventually, when you've breached the final line of defense, you start popping. What happens at that point? You start exploiting the rear. That's where you usually use wheeled vehicles. Why? Because they can hit roads and they can hit paths and they can go fast tracked vehicle. And you're going into the rear to raise all kinds of hell and havoc. You're destroying the ash and trash in the rear. The support, the service support, the support vehicles, the headquarters, anything like that.
Okay.
Meanwhile, you start flanks rolling up the enemy, so you're widening in the breach. They can't be closed.
Okay.
That's classic breaching operations. And now, what did we see in Ukraine? Yeah. The incompetence we saw in Ukraine, thank God they're incompetent, and let them be ever more incompetent, ever more dead. Yes, I am very one-sided on this.
You're entitled to your opinion.
They've been bombing my home city for 9 friggin' years. I'm very one-sided on this.
Yeah, they organized the assassination of my one good friend, so I'm not particularly thrilled either.
Yeah.
But all you can do is laugh. That's how people from Cleveland deal with their problems. We laugh at them, even when your friend gets murdered. Anyway, sorry for distracting you. Anyway, so what did we actually see during the counteroffensive?
So the incompetence we saw in the counteroffensive, we never saw an operation larger than 1 battalion to begin with that. So none of this division-wide attack. We saw there were several attacks around Ariokova at the battalion level. They were all miserable failures. Since then, again, there was no air superiority, obviously. There was no particular artillery superiority in any portion of the sector. Though they did come on, in a couple of areas they've come to parity at best, but that's because they've stripped artillery off of everything else, the rest of the front. There was no smoke, there was no adequate engineering assets, and on top of that, you can see that there's no experience, because the fact is, most of these guys that were sent in the West to train, I mean, the generals that trained them are, well, they're criminal. Either they're criminally incompetent, or they're just criminally psychopathic. The American generals, the French, and so on. And I know how generals become generals. If they're above 1 star, they're nothing but a political hack.
Oh,
They don't
we've
get.
heard that from a lot of people, man. I know how that goes. So essentially, they sort of train them to fight some way that's not realistic.
Well, it was isn't that they. First of all, there's no unity in training because they were trained in different countries by different approaches.
Yeah.
That's just because it's all NATO. It doesn't mean anything. Each country trains and has its own approach. So that's one. Two, with language barriers, by the way, in all those countries. So I don't know how the hell they train half these guys.
In very weird English, I'm sure.
Yeah, and Spanglish.
Yeah.
English is the word for the destroyed English. English. Then they had the fact that a lot of these guys were just straight off the streets, literally off the streets.
Yeah.
They get kidnapped and they get tossed into one of these units. And the guys that they sent overseas actually were probably more volunteers. Not that there are that many of them anymore. Yeah. But anyway, so you got these guys zero to hero in 3 months. Not going to happen. On a tank, you can train a tank driver to be a decent non-combat tank driver in about a week. What does that mean? It means he can drive forward, he can turn, he can do things like that. Can he find a hole in a depression in a field to hide a tank in? No. Yeah. Can he maneuver effectively in closed areas or in cities? No. That comes with practice and experience. You can train a tank loader, a gunner. You can train a gunner. It's going to take you longer than a week. You can probably do it in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
A tank commander may be basic tank commander in a couple of months, like 4 or 5 months. Okay, you got a crew that's half-ass trained. Yeah. That's half-ass capable. Great, that's one crew. Now you got to train. A platoon commander, so lieutenant, to be able to work as a platoon. So 4 tanks to be able to work as a unit. After that, you got to train 14 tanks to be able to work as a company, and then up to a battalion. You don't get that in 2-3 months when you're starting from nothing. You get that in 2, 3, 4 years of training. And a normal unit, as people leave and new people come in, experience still stays because there's still a critical mass of experienced people.
But you constantly may I provide a counter argument from the media here? This isn't my beliefs, okay? But just something I've heard from people who are very, let's just say, skeptical of Russia. Well, they would say that, Shoigu wasn't a military man. He worked in the emergency services division first, and there's been corruption scandals in the Russian army. How could they be any different? Aren't they the same as these men you're describing who have 1 month to learn how to drive a tank, which is impossible? From there.
Well, let's begin with Shoigu's Minister of Defense. His job isn't to fight wars. He's a minister. He's an organizer. He's got a rank of general, but that's a complementary rank to the position of minister. It just automatically gets assigned in Russia. That's just the way it is. He's not a general. He doesn't command on the field. To begin with, we're talking about level of brigade commander, battalion commander. We're talking colonels. We're talking lieutenant colonels, majors, captains, lieutenants.
Yeah.
You can't make those. You have to grow those. That's just how it is. You can't make yesterday's farmer into tomorrow's tank commander in 3 months. Ain't going to happen. Well, yeah, you can. And then you suffer 80,000 casualties and punch through the security zone just to get to the front line of the first defensive belt.
Yeah.
That's what Ukraine did. 80,000 casualties dead. So you got to figure at least another 30, 40,000 invalids that are never coming back to the battle. So, when you're it's fantasy land, statistics, reality. You can't make this up. They're literally losing 9 to 10 people for every Russian killed.
Now, here's something,
I mean, at this
another
point,
sort of hypothetical question that the media doesn't ask, but I need to ask you is, okay, so there's a legend from the world of professional basketball that Larry Bird, one of the great players, he could go up to someone and tell them, I'm going to run to the right and I'm going to shoot a three-pointer over you. And he would do it because he was that good. Now, the Ukrainians said for about 6 months that they were going to wage a counteroffensive, the design of which would be to sort of directly go into the middle of the Russian lines, split them in half, and then make a sort of a rush towards the Crimean, the land bridge, right? Now, can you do that in war if you're superior to your opponent? Can you just tell them exactly what you're going to do? Or was that insane? Because they did do exactly what they promised, or they tried to anyways.
well, most people figured. Actually, I was split between whether they're going to try to do a political run-up toward Belgrade, or if they're going to, which any direction they would have taken, they're going to die.
Oh.
Let's begin with that. They didn't have the military capability. They didn't have the amount of equipment. They didn't have the experience. They didn't have air superiority. They didn't have tank superiority. They didn't have artillery superiority. Just so you understand,
yeah,
normal standard ratio of attacker to defender. If you're attacking a prepared defender, just prepared. I'm not talking about entrenched.
Yeah,
3-to-1 odds. 3-to-1 odds.
Yeah.
If you're attacking an entrenched defender in a fortified location, 5, 6, 10-to-1 odds, all depending which. Attacking a line that's been 3 lines deep, that's been prepared for 8 months. You better be getting that 6 to 7 to 1 ratio. When you're looking at the fact that they're absolutely inexperienced on equipment that they even have language barriers with, yeah, you're going to need a hell of a lot more men than you're throwing in there, and you're going to need experienced men. And they threw it.
Would it have been tactically superior if they wouldn't have waited 8 months, and even if it was muddy, even if the weather was terrible, to just sort of go forward before the Russians entrenched, or would have made no difference?
They wouldn't have. They weren't capable of doing it at that point.
Oh,
something you got to understand. And my neighbor's son was fighting up in Kharkov. The reason they succeed, there's 2 things that happened in Kharkov. First of all, the reason they succeeded in Kharkov was there was no defensive line. Defensive line. There were defensive sectors, and most of these sectors didn't have overlapping fire, and they had holes in between them up to 3-4 kilometers deep. So the Ukrainians did, first off, was they took what's called a flying column, which is basically, and it used to be just a bunch of guys on horses that rode through whatever and tried to get into the rear to run amok. And they did this on with vehicles, with light vehicles, pickups, Humvees, and so on. And they got in the rear and they started causing havoc. But they never took any fortified position, any town or village, because they couldn't. The moment they bumped into them, they were getting repelled and taking heavy casualties. So once they were starting to do the havoc, and they caused enough havoc in the Kharkov area, in Kharkov itself, there was a large armored fist that was being put together. And the tanks were being hidden in places like underground parking lots, underneath residential buildings. Russia is fighting this war with one arm and one leg tied behind its back.
Which is what?
Which is why Ukrainian cities don't look like Mosul. America liberated Mosul by ripping up the face of the earth and murdering most of the population. That's how the West fights its wars. It just murders civilians. It has for 1,000 years.
Again, to be honest, I was asked on a Russian TV show, essentially, how could Russia communicate to the West, like it was sort of about like the lack of understanding. And the thing is, I told them is that unfortunately, if you actually wanted to convince Washington that they've lost, you'd essentially have to annihilate every brick in Kiev. And of course, that's repulsive. That would be the death of 3 million people. That's not something I personally advocate, but that's, I think, probably the only thing that they would actually really understand about this war.
I don't think you'd have to take Kyiv out. You have to wipe out the vast majority of the Ukrainian forces. And I said that from first day. I was on. I mean, I'm on Russian television about 3, 4, 5 times a week. So I'll be on Вечер Соловьевым tomorrow.
Oh,
I'm usually on Tuesday.
Tell him I said hi. We used to work right next to each other. So,
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, across the hall. Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you this, and I said this from the very first day when they asked me. The only way you're going to get there's 2 reasons we need to have gone in there and left a mountain of corpses as far as the Ukrainian forces go. Because one, that's what the West is going to understand. That's the only thing the West is going to understand. They need to be scared. That's the only way you're going to get them to the table in any kind of honest fashion. Otherwise, they're going to be trying to treat with Russia like they treated with the Indians.
No.
And we're not Indians. 2, you need to wipe the Ukrainians off the face of the earth so there is no desire for revenge. And I use the example of
the Ukrainian
1940
military forces, I should hope, because killing off the kids, trust me, that is not a good policy.
No, I'm not talking civilians.
Okay, thank goodness.
I'm talking military, and any paramilitary has to be basically exterminated with extreme prejudice. Why? In 1945, there was no thought in the German mind that they could have won that war.
Yeah.
There was no desire for it. They knew they got their asses handed to them, and they got it handed to them badly. It could have been even worse. And that's what the enemy has to have in his mind. 1917, 1918, when the Germans surrendered, and not a single Western Allied soldier, or the Eastern Front had ceased, thanks to the communist, thanks primarily to the Liberal Revolution in February 1917. But the Western Allies also never stepped foot inside of Germany. So as far as the Germans were concerned, we were betrayed. We could have won that war.
Yeah.
But they've gotten better than we got. In 1945, there was no such concept. They knew they had their asses handed to them, and it only could have gotten worse at that point. Yeah. So there's no desire for revenge. There's no desire for anything but stop the killing.
Okay.
And that's the only way you can deal with an enemy, especially an enemy that's politically or ideologically.
That sort of begs the question: if we're going to compare this to 1945, well, the Soviet forces took the Reichstag, right, by bayonet point, which essentially then would mean that the House of the Rada, or whatever the hell it's called in Kiev, would have to be taken in the same way. And also, one thing I wanted to talk to a military expert about is everyone talks about how the Russians have mined everything, that the mines are some of the great technological heroes of this battle. But if you mine everything on that side of the line, how do you advance?
Well, first of all, depending on what kind of mines you're using, normal practice of any military, professional military, is you make mine maps.
So they're not everywhere.
That way, when you move forward, you can clear your own paths, and then the following troops know where the mines are at. Now, if you're using the air deployable mines, such as canister rounds, canister rounds is how they're cassette rounds. Multiple munition mines, cluster mines, if you want to use that terminology. The problem with cluster mines, and by the way, when the Pentagon says American cluster munitions are really good, they don't threaten the public because there's only 1 or 2% that don't blow up, that's the biggest crock of shit that I was ever told by anyone. Yeah. I mean, that's so far from reality. It's not even that you got to walk outside and see what color the sky is.
Gotcha.
The reality of it is with American munitions, cluster munitions, on average, 30 to 40% don't explode.
Ooh.
And that's, by the way, was proven in the Gulf War. And in fact, if you listen to McGregor, Colonel McGregor has said before, when they were advancing, they were having problems that they were asking the Air Force to stop cluster munitions because they were blowing out the tires on their heavy trucks, on the 5-ton trucks. It doesn't, a grenade-sized munition won't do anything against a tank track. No. But follow-on wheeled vehicles, it'll screw them up. So 40% don't explode. Plus, these munitions that they're shooting, 155 millimeter shells, are probably about 30 years old. So only God knows what percentage is actually exploding.
From what I understand, the Russian military destroys everything on its 25th birthday. Up in terms of old munitions, they either sell it or blow it up themselves. So, yeah.
And the U.S. starts a war somewhere and gives it a brand new price level as credit to some other country.
Gotcha. Well, we are the great capitalists of the world. What can I say? So anyways, then another thing before I forget, because I have all these things in my mind, I wanted to actually get a real knowledgeable person to answer. Is when we saw the beginning of the counteroffensive. We've talked a lot about this, but one kind of last question. We saw these images.
Stop, 1 second.
Yep.
1 second, because it's annoying as hell for a military person. It's not a counteroffensive. It is just an offensive. A counteroffensive, it's a propaganda piece to call it counteroffensive, because all the Russians attack, so we're counterattacking. They're not counterattacking. This is an offensive. A counteroffensive is the enemy's attacked, I've stopped them, and I counter hit them.
Yeah.
So when Russian forces start to push back under Rakhov back against the Ukrainian pushes, those are counterattacks.
Mm-hmm. Well, just about the spring offensive was another term that was used for that. So with the spring offensive, we saw a lot of images of like basically these clusters of destroyed tanks. The media told us that essentially the Russians would sort of hit the first minesweeper, and then it would cause panic, and then everything else would get hit, or they'd try to drive away from the column and run on the mines. Why was this repeating image of these clusters of destroyed tanks all over the media?
Because they're incompetent.
Gotcha.
I mean, look, the standard, first of all, of course, any tank, any mine clearing engineered up tanks. So basically you have these additions that you can clamp onto a tank. Yeah. You have foils that flip around, so chains. Mm-hmm. They're flipping like this. And the chain flips and another chain flips, and they're hitting mines and they're exploding. Yeah. And the chains are getting damaged. Or you have like on a tractor, you'll have the plow in the front, and you're just plowing the ground forward. Plowing through the ground and exploding mines. And then that plow is going to go into pieces anyways, too. So those are engineered, those are vehicles with engineering additions on them to clear mines. Of course, those are going to be your first target. But the standard practice is if you're in a column, let me take a step back. Almost all of the fighting has been taking place in what's called a security zone. The security zone is not part of the defensive line. It is north of the defensive line. What it's meant to do, when the enemy is moving forward, they're normally moving forward in column to be able to move faster. Your job is to start hitting them. You're not hitting them hard, but you're hitting them enough that they have to break column and go into combat formation. Combat formation tricks the vehicles, uses up fuel, slows the advance down, and fatigues the troops. Plus, it does cause some casualties. That's the whole point. So the enemy, by the time the enemy reaches your front line, they're already tired. Mm-hmm. They're already degraded. To some degree, they've already been degraded. So these aren't hard battle line positions. That's why it's called the security zone or gray zone.
Yeah.
The fact that almost all the combat over the last 4 months has taken place in the gray zone tells you that they were so incompetent they couldn't push through what they should have been able to push through within the first day to 2 days. Mm-hmm. Taking 5-10% casualties pushing through the gray zone, and then taking a majority of the casualties at the first line. I don't know. My nose is itching. I don't know why. I've got light allergies.
Don't worry about it. I'm a real fidgety person. People probably see me touching my hands and pulling at stuff, and so don't worry about it. But
I don't know why my nose. I don't know.
Well, another question then. I mean, like, as a man, I never served in the military. I was only part of the Russian military as a reality show for 7 days. 7 days was plenty, not my cup of tea. But when you're in a vehicle, and you see you're in a column and you're moving, and you see the vehicle in front of you get blown up, I mean, what is your reaction to that supposed to be? Because you're obviously not just supposed to sit there and be next, but you're not supposed to panic. Like, what were these guys supposed to do in that situation?
Okay, well, the next question is, what did it get blown up by? If it hits a mine, your next job, particularly if you're a tank, Your next job is you turn the turret around so the barrel is to the back, and you ram that damn vehicle in front of you, and you push it through the minefield. And that vehicle becomes your plow. And then everybody else follows behind you. That's how you clear a minefield if you don't have engineering assets.
Huh. Wow. Never thought of that. That's a really good idea.
That's how you...
And
now, the fact that...
and if it was hit by artillery or another tank or something?
First of all, for them, why what they've been doing when the first vehicle hits a mine is they start to panic.
Yeah.
And they fan out. And then they all go searching for their own mine. And they usually find their own mine. That's why you see a company start to fan out, and they're all going different directions, and they all blow up. And it's typical inexperienced panic. So that's what grip. I got to get out of here. I got to get through this minefield. No, you're not. More likely not. If it's a well-sown minefield, you're not going to make it. It's just a fact of life. You might make it on foot, and then that's a big question, Mark. Because a human being will set off an anti-tank mine faster than a tank.
Oh, really?
Per square centimeter, a human being puts down more pressure than per square centimeter of a tank tread. Tanks treads are wide and they're long. They disperse weight. Human being foot is small. It's got a lot of pressure coming down. A human being stepping on a tank mine will turn into red mist.
Gotcha.
And maybe a little piece here and a little piece there.
Oh yeah. So unfortunately, the 21st century nature of this war means we have gotten a lot of gruesome videos online. That's for sure. So I'll put it this way: I've seen it. I think one thing that's gonna haunt me till the day I die is this one APC. The back door of it comes open. That might be the wrong term. We'll see. It might be an armored fighting vehicle. Forgive me if that's the wrong.
It's a Bradley infantry fighting vehicle.
Yeah, and the guy basically jumps out. He jumps on a mine, minus one leg, and it was in like really high quality. I'm like, holy. Wow, that's I think about that one sometimes at night. So, anyways, that's I guess my own low personal fear here.
I've seen so much of this stuff. It doesn't faze me any. Maybe I'm just jaded.
Well,
maybe I'm just whacked.
Now we can sort of get back. We kind of got to the meat of the interview. Some of these key questions because I work in the media, so a lot of these questions I asked you are from a media angle. But I kind of want to know what was your? Did you then have to actually for the United States fight in Afghanistan or Iraq, or maybe fight's the wrong word. Occupy might be a better term. Did you have to do any of that, or were you sort of on base somewhere? Like in the territorial United States?
Well, I was I did most of my field service in the Balkans. And then I was supposed to go to Afghanistan. In fact, I was asking to go to Afghanistan. And I wound up getting sent to Georgia as a military advisor. Mm-hmm. They need a Russian speaker. So, yeah, I was stalking the colonel in charge of an 18th Airborne Corps. I'm sorry, the colonel was a major who was in charge of deployments, individual deployments. So I was at that point. I was head of a team that was doing. We were inspecting readiness with different units for deployment. It was deployment to Iraq. Mm-hmm. For the upcoming war in Iraq, it hadn't started yet.
So we're talking really early, 2001, 2002-ish, kind of late 90s, that era.
2002.
Okay.
Yeah, mid 2002, as a matter of fact. I was stalking him. I was sick and tired of it wasn't a desk job per se. No. I was doing a lot of travel on the road from different units to different units. I was doing a big project on training on deployment exercise, but I mean it wasn't my cup of tea. I'm a combat officer, so I got sick and tired of that, and I started leaving him messages, getting to phoning him. I couldn't ever catch him, and we were on a range. As a matter of fact, we went on a range firing, and this major's coming up, and I read his name tag, and like, that's you, and he reads my tag. Next mission, I'll send you. Just leave me the hell alone. Thank you, sir. That's what I wanted. And then I was preparing to go to Afghanistan, and they came up with, hey, we need to send you to, you speak Russian, and then they got the rating, top rating in Russian. So we need to send you to Georgia. We need a Russian speaker. There'll be a military advisor there. It was a UN mission. Yeah. So, okay. I went there. When I came back, my guys... when I came back, I was part of 18th Airborne Corps Dragon Brigade, which is a headquarters brigade. Came back to that. They were getting ready to go to Iraq. I'd gotten married in Georgia, so I brought my wife back, and they had gotten nothing done. I mean, I've been requesting getting her paperwork through, getting her an ID card, and all that. I lived, I lived 50 miles away from Fort Bragg. I lived on the edge of Raleigh. So, I could make it there, 2 hours and be on base, ready for deployment. I could make it 50 miles. But she couldn't drive. She couldn't do anything. She first time in the U.S. At that point,
drive. If she couldn't drive means she's not born American, right?
Well, no, yeah. We had when I was in high school, we had Royal Insurance move down from New York City and bring down all of its New Yorkers to Charlotte, North Carolina. And the next 2 months was nothing but car accidents because all those New Yorkers have never driven their lives.
As someone who's from Ohio, I only knew one person who, at the age of by 19 or 20, didn't have a driver's license, and that's because they had this psychotic fear of driving. It was a real psychological barrier, and that was the only person. So it was usually only foreign people didn't drive, and their lives were very boring because of it.
The colonel I had, he wanted me deployed with him because ASAP, because he didn't have enough captains. And I'm sitting there I can't leave my family. I got to a point where, I got to a bad enough place in that I was like, look, if I need, because this guy was an asshole. He wound up getting fired from his position after got back. I'm not saying anything against blacks, because I had a black brigade commander who was excellent, but this guy was promoted by quota.
Oh, I see.
This lieutenant, and he screwed up so bad when they went to Iraq that he wound up getting fired when they got back. But he was determined to send me because he needed another captain. I'm like, look, my wife can't get anywhere. She doesn't have a base card because the secretary that we had that I've been requesting for 2 months for her to get everything done before we arrived didn't do anything. At that point, and the interesting thing is too, my wife was pregnant. So realistically, if I got deployed within a month, they would have sent me right back to handle all of this. Because the moment she started complaining, there would have been.
So there's some sort of exception where, hold on, your wife gets pregnant and then they send you back. That's crazy.
Well, no, not under normal circumstances.
Oh.
If your wife is pregnant while you're deployed, then you've got other issues.
Oh, well, yeah.
If your wife or your family members have a medical issue or have a situation where they cannot take care of themselves and nobody can take care of them, then they'll send you back to settle it, and then they'll send you back to where you. The problem is she didn't have a driver's license, and it took a while to get one. She'd never driven a car. And she didn't have her ID card. She didn't have anything. She couldn't get on base. She couldn't get any services. She could get to base. She couldn't get on base. Because or post, actually, bases in Navy. Because she didn't have her ID cards. So they would have sent me back to take care of all that anyways. So I'm telling her, look, give me a month and I will join you guys. I need to put my family together. He's like, no, because he needed a quota. I went and told my the case officers, look, if I need to, I'll go get drunk and get in a car and get arrested.
Oh, gotcha.
Because at this point, I can't drop the family. Her English, well, she spoke decent English, but she couldn't understand anybody in the South. So that was a whole different.
Yeah, that's like anyone who meets my father, they're tested with their level of English listening skills. I'll put it that way, So, yeah.
Yeah. So it's just like that. So then they transferred me, and I became an instructor in a military academy. And then we were supposed to go to Afghanistan to train them, but for some reason they took another unit. So I did my time in Macedonia, I did my time in Bosnia, did my time in Georgia, but I didn't make it into Afghanistan. I wound up in Georgia.
Now, just to be clear, you said you were a bit excited about Afghanistan. Now, is that from the standpoint of someone who trained to be a soldier, wanting to actually really do it, or was this like a patriotic thing?
The you know, I was never one of these people that thought, "Oh, you're defending America's freedoms in Afghanistan." Because my first question to that would be, "What hell? How the hell did America's freedoms get lost in Afghanistan or in Iraq or in any other country?"
Yeah.
I knew it was bullshit. I knew it was bullshit from day one.
Yeah, but you could die for that bullshit. You know.
Well, there's a different issue here. I'd given my word, and so I swore my oath. I'd given my word, and while I was on service, I kept my word. And if I needed to go fight, and if I needed to go die, I knew what I was getting into when I swore the oath. Did I believe in the shit the politicians say? No, not for maybe about 2-3 years I was brainwashed when I was a lieutenant, and then I went to Bosnia. Mm-hmm. I went to Macedonia, I went to Bosnia. The Slavic language is Serbian, basically, close enough to Russian. And you start talking to people, and you start seeing the amount of bullshit the government's spewing, and it's nothing like what they're telling you. It's all crap.
Now, were the other men that you served with, were they also like you in their attitude, or did they sort of drink the Kool-Aid?
Yes and no, depending. Some people drank the Kool-Aid. Some people saw it for what it was. Some people just didn't care because it's just part of the profession. Gotcha. So it all depends on the person. Mm-hmm. The older you get, the less you drank the Kool-Aid. Look, soldiers sign up for the crap the politicians say. You're going to defend America. You're going to defend Russia or whoever else you're going to defend. Okay, well, in this case, you really are defending Russia because you've got NATO coming in from every direction. Yeah. But soldiers sign up to the platitudes that the politicians put out. They don't serve and fight for those platitudes. They serve and fight for each other. Mm-hmm. That's just how it is. And anybody's got half a brain in the U.S. Army figures out pretty quickly, you're not defending America in Iraq. No. You're not defending America in Afghanistan. You're not defending America in Syria. You're not defending America in all these other places. Yeah. It's just not.
Well, anyways, I just want to say that we're at about the hour mark here, and you probably want to get to sleep if you're used to that Army lifestyle. That's getting up early. So I just want to thank you very much for your time, and also for our viewers. I'd love to have you back in the future. I think we sort of opened a lot of interesting topics with your unique experience here, and our format here is in some ways better than Solovyov Live because we have a lot more time. So, but anyways, for the audience, if you have any questions, we can have our guest right back on maybe in the near future and get more deep into these military details. Anyways, I'd like to thank you, sir, for your time. And to be honest, I guess as an American, I should thank you for your service regardless of whether it didn't quite actually serve America's interests. Hey, you tried. So thank you very much. More than I did.
Thanks.
I was a Peace Corps volunteer. That was easy. No one was shooting at me.
The problem. I'll tell you the problem with Peace Corps these days. What Kennedy set up was actually a very brilliant soft power approach.
It is. It's a great idea that Russia should have tried to copy or should in the future. It's an amazing idea.
Well, my brother-in-law in Georgia, Republic of Georgia, not the state of Georgia. My brother-in-law in Republic of Georgia was a driver for the U.S. Embassy for a while, and then he was driving the Peace Corps guys around. Mm-hmm. And they said, they don't. All they're doing is basically information gathering for the CIA.
Oh.
They go out and do what they used to do. They go out and they take surveys. Mm-hmm. What do you think of this policy that your government is doing? What do you think of this government? What do you think of this? They're not, it's basically, they've been co-opted is what it comes down to. Unfortunately.
Well, I can tell you in Kazakhstan, we didn't do any of that type of research. The only sort of fishy thing was that we had the policy where no one was supposed to serve in the capital city. And this was around the time when they were trying to transition the capital from Almaty to the new Astana. As the new capital. Yeah. So they kind of had sort of like two capitals. So anyways, everyone wanted to live in the big city for some unknown reasons, I guess to party. But they didn't let anyone, except one guy was for some reason sort of allowed to live right on the edge of the capital city. And he really kind of was weird and different from the rest of the group, and eventually he got thrown out of the program for mysterious reasons. So that always kind of raised a lot of red flags as to why he was sort of allowed in the forbidden zone and then was just mysteriously vanished from the program at some point. So that guy kind of gave off shady ways. But to be honest, of the 2 years of my life I gave to it, nothing really... Other than, like, honest propaganda of, look at all these gleaming white people who come from wealthy backgrounds who, because it was me and one other guy. There was one other guy who grew up eating rabbits and me from the ghetto. But everyone else was just, like, gleaming white people. So I could see that. But that's legit propaganda. And propaganda is a part of the deal. I don't have any problem with that. There's nothing insidious about that. I don't think. So, anyways, we're going to hit the road here, friends. Yeah, what? Oh.
What did you guys do there for the people?
Oh, all right. Well, we'll get to this. Mine was sort of a hybrid of, I started off just teaching English in a small village. Well, I guess the insidious thing is, like with all the former Soviet republics, you have this concept of Russia is evil. If it wasn't for Russian influence, your country... the Baltics, Ukraine, Georgia, whatever would be rich, right? That's the message. But and at the same time, Russian culture is harmful, so the Russian language is an evil thing that has to be removed. But everyone needs to learn English, all the kids. So essentially, in Kazakhstan, it was really about this massive attempt to try to teach the children English. But, of course, the people that I worked with were naturally almost entirely liberal. So when they were sort of given the opportunity to kind of, like, get mini grants, do projects, it was like, parades for, it's not sexual awareness, like sexual education sort of things. Because naturally all my colleagues were like, well, in Kazakhstan, they don't tell the kids in school anything about sex. That's awful. Let's do this, kind of like the very... first stepping stones towards some kind of LGBT stuff. But again, the volunteers did that on their own. There was no one, like, whispering in their ear. I think it was just mostly a matter of getting the right type of person. Like, I guess if we take, like, 40 really hardcore, like, old school Russian people and put them in some place and give them grant money, they're probably going to come up with similar projects. I think it's just a cultural thing. One thing I did that was different than other people is there was this business incubator where my one girlfriend at the time, who was American, we became boyfriend-girlfriend while we were there. And the girlfriend worked at this business incubator, and so I kind of did the teaching in the small village, but I also was at this business incubator to help out with them. It was kind of a cool project, but again, there was really never anything insidious. Then again, I made it pretty clear that I was not like Johnny Patriot then, and obviously as someone who left the United States forever, I guess I'm not now. So maybe they didn't approach me. I don't even quite understand why they approved me for the program. But the only thing I could say is to end up our episode was the woman who was sort of like my boss, one of the directors. She was like, Tim, over these 2 years, you didn't do that much, but you didn't complain once. And that was great. Because with these Peace Corps volunteers, a lot of complaining, man. Like the amount of complaining, and also because generally it attracts liberals. So it's, about I need to emotionally vent. No, you don't. You really don't. Like they even had like an anonymous psychologist and remember, this is 2004 2006 in Kazakhstan, which is a bit behind the trends, so you're kind of thinking more like 1990s technology, and they like set up a hotline so people could like talk to like a psychologist or do like counseling with the other. It's like, holy crap, guys, I know we're in a different country, but like you had to deal with war or you could like die, and like here, yeah, maybe some bad things could happen to you, but it's like, who cares? It's 2 years. Like, you could quit. And most people are in their 20s also. It's like, okay, just chill out. Just roll with it, man. Yeah, the food kind of sucks. Who cares? Like, just roll with it.
It's not bad. Come on.
I don't know.
Kazakhstan,
or too, like, for me, like, there was I don't know. You changed my mentality because at first when I got there, I was like, boy, I just don't really want to live too far away because I don't want to have to poop outdoors. And then after you do it, for the outhouse or like having a bucket or something, you can take a shit anywhere. And you don't even care. So I think in some ways it's a good thing. It's like I tell people in Russia, it's kind of like a violence-free army because it does have that sort of like structure to it. And you kind of have to go out into the wilderness and survive. but there's no gun. So it's kind of a weird experience. But anyways, then let me then actually find. I think I've tried to say goodbye 3 times, but this time actual Tim Kirby Russia Hardcore. Check us out on Telegram.